Lords, I rise to speak to Amendment number 62 in my name and that of the Noble Earl of Leicester in this group. Again, it's about a particular form of occupational housing. I do need to declare an interest. I own one small apartment in the West Midlands which has been let out to a tenant for a long time, but according to some of the media, that makes me a kind of Rachmanite landlord who's trying to destroy this bill. I can assure your Lordship's House that is the last thing I have in mind. This is about people who live in tied accommodation, and as a Church of England bishop, I live in what we call a tied palace rather than a tied cottage, but it is accommodation I only inhabit for as long as I exercise my particular current office. That's the situation for many, the vast majority of stipendiary Church of England clergy, many other ministers of religion. It's also the case for a lot of farm workers and estate workers who are required for the better performance of their duties to live where they are actually working. And that's a category that is accepted by HMRC in terms of taxation legislation as a special form of tenure. Now, a large proportion of those who live in tied accommodation do not have the capacity during their working lives to save up and be able to provide for themselves in retirement when they eventually have to move out of their tied dwelling. I won't benefit from this particular amendment I'm trying to propose to your Lordships today because I will be able to accommodate myself by other means. But the Church of England Pensions Board does each year let out about 50 or so properties, that's the average over the last few years, 50 properties to retiring clergy or sometimes to the spouse or surviving civil partner of a member of the clergy who's died in office, usually at a rent about 60% of what the market rent would normally be in those circumstances. And these properties are made available for clergy to have a look at any time up to about 5 years before they retire. And the importance of that is that we know that when people retire, move out of tied accommodation, they need time to think about where they're going to live, what sort of community they will want to settle and put down roots in, because that's probably where they will stay for the rest of their lives. At the moment, what the Pensions Board is able to do, and what other landlords who are used to accommodating people in tied accommodation can do, is that they can kind of reserve a property for some period of time in advance and let it out in the meantime. But that won't be possible if the bill passes in the present form. So all my amendment seeks to do is to make a small change that will allow extra ground for granting possession where it's to accommodate somebody who's moving out of tied accommodation, and the person who's providing their accommodation in retirement is somebody who is closely connected with who they were working for. So in the case, it may be a former employer. In the case of clergy who are office holders rather than employees, a bit like police officers, where office holders, it will be an appropriate charity that provides accommodation in retirement. It will make very little difference to the availability of rented housing overall. This is not going to make it impossible for other people to find properties to rent. But as we've already heard several times this afternoon, there are people who do wish to rent for a shorter period of time. It will be known that these properties are going to be subject to that clawback when the person who has earmarked them retires. If this amendment isn't possible, then I fear what will happen is that properties will simply lie empty for several years until the member of clergy or the farm worker is ready to retire into them, and that just takes properties away from the rented market, which I don't think is the aim of this bill at all. So I do think this is rather a modest measure. It's quite niche. It only affects particular categories of labourer. But for them, it makes a huge difference to be able to identify where they're going to live when they retire, a few years ahead of retirement, and to know that that property will be available for them on the day of their retirement.